So good morning, everyone. So I have a confession to make. I owe Vilnius 65 cents because I was free riding with the 2G bus this morning because I couldn't buy a ticket. I had both apps on my cell phone, but you have to explain to me how I can buy the ticket when I go back to the airport tonight. So this said, I sense a lot of ambition in the room. And dear Minister, I think your introduction was wonderful because I sensed so much positivity, so much ambition, and I started it with something that is a small problem that's going to be solved. And I think between where we are today and the visionary future, there is this messy middle part which we will overcome. So, 1.7 million people right now don't have electricity in Florida because of the Hurricane Milton. The mayor of Tampa, a city in Florida, told citizens, if you don't evacuate, you are going to die. That is such a blunt statement that I have never heard when politicians talk about climate change. But actually, we could make similar statements about climate change. Unfortunately, human nature doesn't respond well to long-term threats. So we have to find other ways to motivate behavioral change. And also, changing the transport system is a systemic change, and it requires many levers to be pulled. So unfortunately, it's not as easy as saying, if we don't act now, many people are going to die. Although it is the truth. Fortunately, we have leaders in Europe and in our member states that are very ambitious, and in our cities, that are very ambitious. And we have more than 100 cities in Europe that have committed to becoming climate neutral by 2030. That is a humongous ambition, but it's achievable. Vilnius was elected the European Green Capital 2025 and has the ambition of becoming a green city, and it's calling itself a green city in the making. And that is a wonderful statement because it gives an ambition, but also it shows action. It's in the making. So we have to act. And to become climate neutral, we also have to green our cities. To green our cities, we have to use our space more efficiently, and to do that, we have to change the transport system because roads are taking up, in many cities, more than 50% of the urban space, and we actually need to de-seal those surfaces in order to green cities, to plant trees so that the soil can absorb water that will prevent cities to become muddy rivers when there are extreme rainfalls. So how do we do that? Innovation plays an essential role. We have just, at EIT Mobility, we've just done a cost-benefit analysis simulating different scenarios as to how can we actually get to the ambitious target of reducing CO2 emissions by 55% by 2030. And what the results show is that innovation can reduce. So the innovations that we already see that are cutting edge today, but need to be deployed at scale, they can reduce CO2 emissions by 21% by 2030. That's not quite 55%, but there are other measures that can and have to be taken, which are around policy, which are around incentivizing the right behaviors and nudging people to take public transport, to cycle, to walk. And we need to use the whole toolbox. We need to avoid unnecessary travel, reduce commutes where people have been commuting to work 5 days a week. Now they commute 3 days a week. That's already a significant reduction. We have to build cities in a way that people can access essential services, they can go shopping, they can go to the doctors, they have kindergartens around their homes, and they actually don't need to travel long distances for essential everyday services. Then, of course, we need to shift traffic, and we need to shift trips to more sustainable modes than the private motorized traffic. In Europe, on average, 40% of trips are made by private cars. I think in Lithuania overall it's something like over 90%, in Vilnius it's 50%. So you're starting from a different baseline, let's say. And we can bring this down by 16% if we shift some of those trips, especially the shorter ones, to cycling, for instance. So 13% of the trips made by cars today, by private cars, are shorter than 3 kilometers. Such trips take only 8 minutes by bike. So this is an easy shift, I would say, if we provide the right infrastructure, if we provide safe cycling lanes, if we provide infrastructure for people to park their bikes securely, and we educate. But then, of course, there's a shift to be made to public transport, there's a shift to be made to shared mobility services. So there's a whole range of modes that we have to use. And then, of course, the optimization. So shifting the fuel, fossil fuel traffic to electric. So it's all about electrifying vehicles, and this will do the heavy lifting, but it's also the most costly measure to take. So, because it requires charging infrastructure, EVs are unfortunately quite expensive today, and we are facing also an industrial problem in Europe. China went all in on electric vehicles years ago, and compared to that, Europe has been caught in what we call innovator's dilemma. So we have had very strong and still have a very strong automotive industry that have been global leaders, and they have been reluctant to actually jump into this new sector, which is called electric, and transform their business. So how do we now transform the sector that makes up 7% of the European GDP and where 70 million Europeans work? So we have to embrace the change, and industry has to embrace the change because there's no other way. The industry is moving towards green, it's moving towards electrified. So how do we go all in and embrace that transformation? And this requires to innovate. We heard in the introduction, invest in startups, engage with startups. So startups play a very important role. If you look at the top investors in startups globally, you will find the top tech companies. So you will find Alphabet, you will find Meta. They innovate by working with startups, by acquiring startups, because this is where innovation largely comes from. So the electrification, is it going fast enough? So clearly, if you look at the figures, it's not. In the second quarter of this year, only 12.6% in Europe of the total new car sales were electric. So the number actually was lower than at the same time last year. Last year we had 14%, now it dropped. So it's not going in the right direction. Even if it will pick up and it will increase, we have to accelerate that, because every internal combustion engine car that's put on the road today will stay on the road for another 15 years. So what you see represented here is still going to be the picture 5 to 10 years from now. We will still have predominantly internal combustion engine cars on the roads. So we cannot wait for 2035, where that there's the regulation that we will need to have 100% zero emission vehicles sold, new sales, but we need to already transform the fleet right now. So what needs to be done? We have to electrify the corporate fleets. We have to electrify the public fleets, because these are the vehicles that have a very high utilization, and they go many kilometers a day as well. So this is a big lever, and I think Lithuania has very ambitious targets regarding the public fleets, electrifying buses, and this is something that we need to do all across Europe. Secondly, for the private cars, we need more affordable cars, and to have more affordable cars, they have to also be built smaller, using less resources, and the trend is the opposite right now. So since 1950, cars have become longer. So today, cars are around 70% longer and 40% wider than 1950. So all the efficiency gains that we've made through innovation, the drivetrains, the materials, etc., all this innovation has gone into bigger sizes instead of gains in energy, less space absorption and consumption. So we need to revert that trend, and the new paradigm has to become more resource efficient, smaller, lighter vehicles that are also more affordable for people. People need to be able to buy those EVs so that we can change that picture, and the picture to become greener. In China, 60% of the EVs are cheaper than the equivalent fossil fuel cars. So they are cheaper. In Europe, 10 to 15% more expensive than the equivalents. So we need to turn that around. And if we look at, so is that possible? Yes, it is. But we need to go all in. OEMs need to go all in on that, and we see how that can be done. If we look at the battery supply chain, Europe has decided this is a critical industry for Europe, and has started the European Battery Alliance. It has started capacity building on batteries. And now experts say by 2026, Europe could be self-sufficient in the fuel cell supply chain. So let's do that all across the industry, not only batteries. The minister mentioned autonomous vehicles, and that she would like robotaxis to drive around in Lithuania. And that is music to my ears on one hand side. On the other hand side, I think we have to find the European model for that. So it is actually going to be the next disruption of automotive. So we are now in that transformation to electric, but in parallel, what's happening in China, what's happening in the US is already the next wave of innovation, which is autonomous vehicles. And they're used for robo-taxis, but what they also can be used for, and that is the vision for Europe, is shared demand responsive public transport. Because public transport, as it's operated today, is not a viable model for broad coverage, for instance, in very sparsely populated areas in the suburbs, where you don't really have the demand to put mass transit and very frequent timetables in place. So here you remove the cost factor of the driver, which is a significant cost driver for public transport, and you make public transit available everywhere. So, who's leading? Again, the US and China are leading, and in Europe we have kind of missed the train here, but there is still an opportunity, and the opportunity is to partner with the technology leaders in autonomous, and we have good examples. In Europe, we have some leaders in Oslo, Ruta, and you will see a vehicle outside here, you do, with 2 startups running autonomous shuttles. In Luxembourg, they teamed up with Pony AI, which is a US-Chinese company, and they will put autonomous vehicles on the road. So they have a mature technology. I saw it in San Francisco. So having those like pockets of innovation in Europe where we can demonstrate the technology, we can demonstrate the use case that will be beneficial for people, that will actually trigger, that will be the inflection point to trigger scale up and others to other cities, other countries to go in on autonomous. And we need that catfish effect. So what is a catfish effect? It's if you are not a dominant player, if you're not a leader, then bring in a leader and to stimulate the ecosystem, to stimulate local innovation. And that is what we have to do on autonomous. Bring in some of the US, the Chinese companies, so that we can transfer the knowledge. What China has been doing with electric, they have brought in Tesla. And that actually was the inflection point for them. And they learned a lot by working with Tesla. And that was one of the reasons why they became global leaders. We're talking a lot about CO2, but there is another as big a problem as CO2, and that's air pollution. So more than 300,000 people prematurely die in Europe of air pollution, and especially particulate matter. And the cost of that is 1.6 billion euros in Europe. So it is a humongous problem, and there are not enough solutions out there to face the problem. So we have to advance technologies to capture the particulate matter from brake abrasion. We have to, and brake abrasion from both public transport and also private transport, so private cars. And we have to start by monitoring. You cannot change what you don't measure and what you don't monitor, and that is why municipalities now start to work. And again, it's the startups who bring the innovation, with startups who have very smart solutions to fuse different data from different sensors, GPS data with ground sensor data, and using AI to create insights. I spoke about Trafi. Now, this is a poster child of a universal multimodal platform, Yelby in Berlin, and it's putting people first. It's putting the user experience first, and it's allowing the user to access multiple modes with one application. And it's not perfect, but it is the idea of, and the concept of the future. So we need universal trip planning, we need universal ticketing, universal payment. So make it easy for users to use whatever mode and whatever combination of modes that is the most affordable, the fastest, the most contextually appropriate way for them to move around through one access point. And the city here is the main orchestrator. So without a city, without a public transport operator that takes the lead, this is not happening. And we have had the experience from the scooters, from the shared bikes in cities all across Europe, that it requires coordination and just putting the technology there, just putting out solutions by individual mobility providers, even if they are super smart, it will not create a good system in the cities. So again, here, the cities, the transport operators, they need to provide a coherent framework, coherent policy, and they need to coordinate the curbside, the public space, with the mobility services to really provide a good infrastructure and a good system also for the business models of the new mobility providers to work. So finally, moving forward to achieve our ambitious targets and Green Deal targets, and also you as a city of Vilnius, but also a country of Lithuania, to achieve your targets, that requires to do all of the things around creating sense of urgency and awareness why things have to change and how, setting ambitious targets, which you do, enabling action, meaning enabling the startups to innovate, enabling also the cities to work with the startups, and there's a role to play for the whole ecosystem, including organizations like ours, EI Turbo Mobility. And in the end, we have to focus on all levels, European, country, city, we have to focus our resources on the markets, the industries, the solutions that we want to drive for sustainable mobility. Thank you.